bitch. Hey y'all, my name is Evelyn. Pronouns she, her. I have my own YouTube channel as well, Evelyn from the Internet. And I'm co-host and co-writer of a PBS Digital studio series called Say It Loud.
My name is Lindsay Ellis, she, her. I also am affiliated with PBS Digital Studios. So we're going to talk about the PBS identity, I guess. I host and co-write It's Lit for PBS. I also have my own channel. That's just my name, where we talk about film and media theory and Transformers.
Hi everyone, I am Natalie Wynn, she, her. I have a channel called ContraPoints that is hard to describe. It's well, basically I just like dig into the worst things online and then try to fix them. So like, incels, that kind of thing. And I also do a lot of issues about transgender issues, so I do that too. That's kind of been more of my 2019 focus.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Danielle Bainbridge, and I will be someone that's a plant in the crowd. So, and I also am affiliated with PBS. You probably can't tell if I'm wearing my old school IR PBS shirt, and I'm the host, writer, and co-creator of Origin of Everything, which is a history channel that thinks about the undertold and under-narrated histories that make up our collective story, and sometimes funny ones.
We have all of our panelists here talking about identity in some way, shape, or form, whether it's gender, race, sexuality, or representations within media. But they all manage to, come to school within these, potentially divisive issues. So I have some questions here for us, but we're also going to be taking questions through Twitter. So if you use the hashtag IdentityVidcon19, we'll do some audience Q&A after that. So wanting to start out, because of our different identities as viewers, we can bring our own backgrounds and perceptions to what we watch. So how are you all thinking about your target audiences? Who are your target audiences, and how are you thinking about their identities and perceptions as you're crafting your videos?
Okay, so I had a chat with my YouTube manager person, and we looked into the analytics because I never will. And YouTube said uses male and female, so I have 91% female audience, and so I think that my audience is me. So I get the sense that they are mostly Black, and if they're not Black, we do have like a commonality in that we're the children of immigrant parents. So I do have a lot of people who are like first generation, their parents are Indian, or Vietnamese, Mexican, because I'm from Texas. So I also have a lot of like Chicano people who watch my videos. So when I create content, I am talking to me and people who are similar to me and have similar experiences. And if you fall outside of those experiences, that's great. Everyone is capable of appreciating multiple different types of content, but I'm not necessarily catering to someone else. So all my inside jokes, if you don't get nuck if you buck, you don't get nuck if you buck. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's interesting because whenever you're talking about your demographics, I think I'm like 75% male, which I think is interesting because your audience on YouTube is who the algorithm thinks it is, because like the reason that is for me in large part is because since I primarily do film, I get recommended in the sidebars from other film YouTubers, but FilmTube is overwhelmingly white and male. Like I'm the girl, and there are a few other smaller channels who are up and coming, and they're already working at a disadvantage because YouTube's algorithm decides what people see and what it thinks you are, and what gender it thinks you are, and what race it thinks you are, and then it will recommend things accordingly. So whenever you kind of step outside of your lane in terms of being a woman talking about film or anything that is that deviates from the norm, you're already kind of fighting an uphill battle. But in my case, you know, you have your core audience, but then you kind of, if a video gets like blows up enough, then it kind of starts eking into, you know, a wider a sphere. And so I think there's like two levels to it. There's the level that your normal audience expects, and then there's the level that you have to anticipate that every single video you make will be seen by someone who has no idea who you are and like may be completely outside of your normal demographic. And so I think it is kind of a tricky balancing act that we work on a lot.
Yeah, well, my demographic, I mean, I've got a gender split most of the time, about 50-50, and for 2019, almost all the videos I do are about transgender issues, and there are not that many trans people in the world. So mostly I'm in a position where I'm talking about these issues to people who don't know anything and are sort of ignorant at best. And I also, but you know, at the same time, like I have a core like fandom, and a lot of my really big fans are also trans. So there's this kind of weird tension where there's like people who are expecting me to represent them. It's a more marginalized group with like a few high-profile representatives, so I'm supposed to do all that work. But then also I have to explain like to the people who have like less than zero understanding, right? Like negative understanding, like there's propaganda, you know, anti-trans propaganda is with all they've seen so far. So it's challenging, but I sort of try to hit something for all these groups of people when I'm writing a video together.
So just like all the other creators said, I think I see somewhat of a divide in how I think of my audience. So if I look at, this is something that I realized yesterday when we were doing a panel on science education in the YouTube community. So I would say that our subscriber base, last time I checked, is 53% women. But when a video starts performing better, then you start to see drift. So you see like overrepresentation of men who are watching like high performing videos. So even though the people who I consider our fan base, it trends slightly towards like women in my own age group, so 24 to like 34-ish. They tend to be the most like loyal subscribers, engagers, write on the community tab, comment every week, that sort of thing. If a video goes, I would say in our channel, basically anything over 100,000, then it starts to skew like 75% male. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. I know, like I was listening to Lindsay's explanation, and I was like, that could be part of it, like the recommendation, like who else is making videos on chattel slavery? And maybe that's also like who else is making videos on like the history of American colonization, and that kind of gets lumped into that category. So then it starts to turn over. But when I make the videos, like Evelyn, I kind of make it for someone like me, but thinking about it as if you haven't read the things I've read yet. So it's like you're interested, you're curious, you're an active learner, you want something that's like hard and engaging and has a really wide breadth in terms of topic and also like depth of research, but maybe you just haven't read the books I've read, and so I start from that assumption. It's like you're just as smart as I am, you want everything that I want out of the world, and you're really interested in those things, but that's basically the only idea I have about my audience member or ideal audience member.
Yeah. I have a follow-up for Natalie in particular, but anyone else feel free to jump in. Natalie, with your videos, the audience is very clearly like represented in some of the characters, and so you'll have characters that have certain perspectives that different political like affiliated people will have. So, you know, tell us a bit about those characters and, you know, Tiffany Tumbles and Tabby and such, and they recur, which is cute, but, you know, you also managed to talk about them in a way that doesn't alienate that audience. So tell us a bit about how you're crafting those characters.
Yeah, one thing that I started doing on YouTube is using these like fictional characters that I play all of them, and they represent often like just different viewpoints or political viewpoints. So one thing, when I make these characters, they're in some sense caricatures, but I try to make them sort of three-dimensional in a way where even if I don't agree with what this character is saying, like I try to show them as human and show them as like having some kind of psychology that's not just like this surface level. But it ends up putting me in some weird places, like this character Tabby, which is I guess the most popular one I've made, who's like a kind of street fighting cat girl, who's like an anarcho-communist, and like, in a way, I kind of was it was a kind of parody character at first. Like, I was sort of making fun of like a certain kind of like Twitter leftist that has like an anime avatar and is constantly angry. But the thing is that the people who I was like sort of parodying loved the character so much that it's now become like its own, like they love Tabby. And like, so as far as I'm concerned, Tabby's theirs, it's not mine anymore. That's over. And yeah, so sometimes it's, you know, when I'm representing like something I really disagree with, like I'll make sort of villainous, but I recently tried doing some, you know, I get a lot of requests to talk more about non-binary issues, since I have a fairly like binary experience, and it's kind of, you're not really supposed to talk about experiences outside your own in general, I find, when you're doing this kind of work, but I took a risk with this last video. It's like, all right, I'm gonna play a non-binary character. I was like, okay, we'll see if you guys like it, and it's been really well received actually. So it's tricky, but it can really pay off.
And as you all are thinking about your content strategy, you have the videos, you know, Danielle and Evelyn, that you're making for yourself almost, and seeing things that you want to make, things that you want to see. But then you're also thinking about how the algorithm will perceive things, how videos will perform if you do want the videos to be watched, right? So how are you sussing out which ideas of yours that you're interested in will actually end up getting fully made, and how do you think about balancing your own interests with what you think will connect with the audience?
I think about algorithm a lot. And so we actually kind of deliberately will space things that we know will get a lot of numbers with things that are a little bit more niche and more, heated with our interests. So it'll be like every third or fourth video needs to be like taking down yet another live action Disney movie and explaining why it's bad. Like, and those are not terribly researchy, but they're really easy to write because I am filled with hate. But they get really high numbers, and so like those types of videos are kind of necessary to keep your numbers favorable for the algorithm, so that whenever you go from like something that you know is going to get a lot of numbers, which is like something about Disney or something about Star Wars or whatever, and then you can do something else that's maybe a little more experimental, and that will get higher numbers than it would have because the previous video did that. So we definitely will space our like kind of more poppy, easy clickbait material with the more heady experimental stuff. But it's always kind of a tango because capitalism.
I'd say I rely on my team a lot to tell me when I should turn towards a more like popular topic. I always like joke amongst like Asante is like present. She's part of my team, so like I always joke amongst the team that like I don't have good instincts on thumbnails or titles because I'm always the person who's like, why is colonialism raw? I don't know. I think it's like I don't know how to do something that's like very general or open or feels fun. So sometimes I'm like, okay, I just want to do history of this or history of that. So sometimes I turn to my team and I'm like, okay, what's a fun topic that still has some meat that people will click on? And I need to trust them to like make that happen for me. And if I have a question that is like I don't know the answer immediately, that makes me want to do it. So like a good example of that, where I was wrong, but I guess the video worked out, is that we did a history of middle names. A fan requested it, and right before we were supposed to shoot it, I called our script editor and I was like, this feels dumb. This feels like it's too light, like no one's gonna watch it. And he was like, no, people will like it. Trust me, like it's a good historical topic, it covers a wide range, like it'll perform well, and it did, so I was completely wrong on that front. So I think for me, it's sometimes like acknowledging as much as I know I don't know a lot as well. And so I rely on my fans and I rely on my team to tell me like things that are popular and things that people will want to see, because I don't necessarily always have that great instinct.
It's the same for me. I kind of tune into the comment section and Instagram DMs and see what people latch onto, because both Say It Loud on PBS and my own channel, they're comedy based. And so the thing that's tricky about comedy is there's some things that I think are funny, but I oftentimes can't predict what other people will think is funny. And sometimes people other thing that I didn't necessarily write as a joke. And so that is cool because then I can kind of take that as feedback and say, oh, people are interested in this type of information or this delivery or this character, and then I can use that for future videos.
Just to like jump on what Evelyn was saying, I do have a background in theater, and the thing I find the hardest about YouTube is not hearing people's reactions immediately. Because like being on stage, you could hear someone laugh and you're like, ah, that's funny, now I know. But I think with YouTube, it's like you have to do it all ahead of time, cut it, put it together, and then put it up and hope it plays. And that was like the thing that really was the challenge for me when I started making online content, was not having immediate feedback from people like you, viewers like you. So I think that like anxiety is always with me, because it's like I could do all this effort, all these hours of labor, put my team through all of this rigmarole with, you know, how to package it, and we all put so much care into it, and then it just doesn't work, it like doesn't play. So sometimes I think I try as hard as I can to do a lot of like outreach, like sometimes I'll just post on the community tab, like tell me a thing you'd like to see. And that is sort of my way of varying the topics from like super challenging or like really sometimes dark and depressing ones to things like, okay, why do we eat popcorn at the movies? And now we could talk about, you know, US farm subsidies, and that's still a history, but maybe just gives people like somewhat of a beat between the larger episodes.
Yeah, what a big learning to that, because humor is a tool that you all use in your videos, and I think it really helps add some levity to some of these heavier topics. So, yeah, how are you finding the funny in things? What is your joke writing process? You know, how do you do that?
I basically have on my phone just like a notepad file, and as I think of jokes throughout the day, I'll like just write them down, because I think that jokes are the hardest thing to write for me, because it's you know, if you're writing just an argument or just like a piece of informational writing, like, you know, it's pretty straightforward. But to write a joke, like, you know, and as you were saying, like you don't have this audience feedback on YouTube, so that's one of the weirdest things. That it's especially weird when it's like comedy, because a stand-up comic gets feedback every 6 seconds from the audience, but on YouTube it's like, I hope this is funny. I guess I'll find out in the comments tomorrow, you know. And so my only way to go is basically, if it makes me laugh, then so I'm just entertaining myself, like sitting at the computer, like making myself laugh, and then hoping that I'm not just a crazy person and there's other people out there who find this funny. So yeah, I guess that's what I do. I'll often like have to rewrite a joke like 4 times though to get to that point where it, you know, when I see it on the page, it makes me smile. But you know, it's one of the most challenging things I find.
I feel like Natalie and I are often kind of like swimming upstream based on like the type of material we cover, and like sort of the approach where it is kind of like the culture is kind of hostile to a lot of like anytime you talk about like gender or identity, or like especially in media where you kind of might indicate that, like for instance, an orc in a do-rag, like in the film Bright, might be a little racist, and it seems like that should be an easy, you know, argument to make, but people are really hostile to that sort of thing. So like, and it seems like with anytime you talk about like you know, trans people are human, you know, and so you kind of have to use humor as a tool in order to get people to be open to ideas and to language that they may not have otherwise been open to, because a lot of the reason that people ideas like that is because they have been presented to it in a way that they find threatening, and humor is disarming, and that's why it's important to use, because it can begin to introduce people to ideas they may not have been open to otherwise.
I don't really have like a knack for writing down jokes, so I have to find them on my feet when we shoot. Most of the time, if I said anything that made anyone laugh, it's me on my feet just ripping between takes, and I just try it as many ways as I can. Mostly because I think that when I sit down, well, one, I'm like completely word heavy, both as an academic, like a traditional academic, I'm completely addicted to word count, and wordy jokes don't play. That's like a great lesson to know. So there comes a point where I'm like, okay, now I have 35 words on a page, and it's like semi-funny, but I'm just gonna find it on my feed. And I think that that makes me, also it like gives me a chance to make the people operating the camera laugh, and like that kind of makes me feel better on set. And especially if it's a challenging thing to get through. Like we just did a video surprisingly on libraries that was very emotional to me because it was like, should we defund libraries? Just a theoretical question. I don't believe that we should. I think that they're still hugely vital resources. But you know, there was a point where I was just like reading a thing at the end about like how great modern librarians are, and then at the end I started crying, which is surprising. Like I could read a script because I kind of could brace myself for like a challenging, terrible topic, and I'll never get upset. When I was like, man, the library is great. Modern librarians help deal with childcare issues, and they help the elderly, and then I just was weeping. And then I turned to like, you know, all the ladies on set, and it was funny because like everyone who works in the office, all the women who work on our show, have mothers who are librarians, and I was like, and you know, librarians have given me everything I needed to make this show. You know, everything that I needed is here is because of the library. And I think those sort of moments, like one, it gives me levity, two, it gives me a chance to do something I usually couldn't write down, and three, it just makes it more fun. And I think that it makes it more fun to record because camera is naturally kind of awkward to me, even now. I'd also say that like when I was in high school, I once had a teacher tell me that I used humor as a defense mechanism, and she was like, you seem a little defensive, it seems like you're humorous. And I was like, of course I am. Humor is to defend me. I need defenses from people like you who do things like this. So in some ways it's like humor is disarming, but it also can be protective for us, like a way to laugh through like all the crap we have to deal with to make this kind of content. So it's like two ways. It's for the audience, but a lot of it is for me.
Yeah, I agree. For me, so for me the jokes come easier, and I think it's because, like, I write the jokes before I get into any of the academic stuff because I'm not an academic. So I write the sketches, and I'm like, okay, facts though. All right, how do we incorporate facts? And so for me, it's definitely been a laugh to keep from crying sort of thing. All you have to do is go on Twitter and see Black people. It's not a hot take. This is like a pretty cold take. Black people are the funniest people on Twitter, period. And so, but what we're able to do is like turn disgusting current events into poignant, funny, culturally relevant jokes. And just like, we don't even need the, 240 characters? Like we keep it shorter than that. And we're just able to turn these kind of painful moments into jokes. And so since that comes naturally to me anyway, throughout my like actual life, I'm able to incorporate that into my writing process. And so it also does help on when we're on set filming, because we're writing the jokes and we're writing sketches, and our jokes are sometimes character-based. So like I'm dressing up, it's physical comedy, so I'm like jumping around, and like the sound guy can't keep the microphone still because he's laughing. And I mean, that's really fun for me to get that feedback, to know that it's just not me in my room writing a joke on the script, that it's actually like hitting people. So
Yeah, I want to dig back into how you turn those painful moments into sketches, because you are like naturally talented at it. Like it shows with both Say It Loud and your own channel. And your comedy is based on like that situational humor, right? Like it's not just the silliness, it's not just the clips, it's actually finding humor in that situation. So when you have a topic, and like maybe you could give us an example, but when you have a topic and you want to make a sketch out of it, where do you start and how do you start finding humor in that?
I think it comes from putting a scenario in another scenario and kind of like reimagining it. So an example that I have is, and I can't plan this, so this is something that has to like come to me, usually in the shower. And an example is, I think it was 2016, I made a video called Call in Black, and it was after I had a panic attack at my job after hearing about Sandra Bland. And I live in Texas, I'm about 2 hours from Waller County where it happened, and I've driven on that highway. Sandra Bland and me, she went to college with some of my friends. And so, went to the bathroom, had a panic attack, couldn't call out of work, and I was like, what if I could though? Like, what if that was a sufficient reason for me to just go go the hell home. And so that's a very serious topic, but I kind of reimagined it as, okay, it's funny when you call in sick and you try to like make these stupid excuses, except the excuses were like very exaggeratingly poignant. So that's how I do that.
Yeah. The tone of how you say something is often just as important as what you're saying. And like Lindsay was mentioning, sometimes people will get approached with these topics, but it seems threatening, right? Or it seems like aggressive or antagonistic the way that these topics are being approached. But you all are very good at keeping a level head about it. So how would you describe the overall tone of your videos, and how are you being mindful of maintaining that tone?
One thing that I noticed is that anyone who talks about anything in the kind of social justice category is that almost no matter how smiling and how calm and how rational and how unthreatening you think you're coming across, people will still see this like angry sermonizer telling them what they're not allowed to say. So being like, aware of that, I guess I kind of try to, my tone is almost like celebratory. Again, the jokes are useful for this because they're disarming and they sort of keep me able to stay light and stay sane, but I think that never come across like I'm lecturing is something I'm very careful. So it's always very playful. I guess I will sometimes go have a moment where I'll get slightly angry or where I will like sermonize a little bit, but I try to like save that for a very specific moment so that people will sort of, it sort of stands out more, and people by that point are hopefully have already been kind of invited. So I guess I think of like at the beginning of the video, it's like I'm a hostess and I'm inviting you into this world. So I invite you in, and then I try to keep things very positive in a sense, or very like sort of I'm amused with it. That's the tone. And then if things need to get dark or get serious, then hopefully by that point people are willing to hear it out.
So I guess like the real thing for tone to me is that I just have to, despite evidence to the contrary, trust my viewer a lot. So when I go into it, and if I see a video that has a hot take on a topic, and I'm not going to say that my videos don't have bias, because I have a viewpoint, I have a worldview, I have an identity to lean into what we're doing here today, and those things influence the kinds of things I write about and the takes that I have. But for me, no matter how many times I get a comment that's just like filled with venom and like vitriol and it's horrible and it makes you feel like you never want to make another thing, I always try to write the episode to say, okay, I trust you to listen to this and come to the conclusions you come to. And if I lose that ability, then I can't make this work anymore. I can't do it this way. And I think sometimes when people feel the need to have like an overly strident tone, like this is the only way to think about something, this is right, like blah, 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 then you're not really demonstrating trust in your viewer. And sometimes I mean, you guys are awesome because you're here today, but sometimes viewers let you down. Like someone outside of your community gets hold of the video and they tear you apart and they share it in negative spaces and you get lots of hate, comments, and like you have to set, the PBS guidelines for the like filters we have to set are insane on our channel. Like I looked at it the other day and I was like, some of these aren't even words. Like they're making up new ways to call people mean things and we have to use them. So yes, even though that happens sometimes and it's a shock to the system for all of us on the team, every time I write an episode, I just sit down and go, I'm gonna think the best of you until you show me the worst of you. And I'm gonna make this with the hope and the ambition that when you receive it, you're gonna be gentle with me, just like I'm gentle with you. And overwhelmingly, my community is amazing, and that's what makes it good. They self-police. There was one point where we also post on Facebook Watch, and our viewers there tend to be a little bit older. And one of the producers and I used to say that we had what we called grand mods, or grand mod moderators, who would get down in the comments and people would be like, who is this woman? Does she think she knows everything because of the title of this show? And they'd be like, that's not nice, sir. Take that somewhere else. Put little comments or be like, well, if you think that you're so clever, then why would you have so many typos in your comments? And I was like, grand mods. Sadly, I haven't been able to successfully migrate the brand mods to YouTube, where I think they're much needed. But I think that like I also am heartened by that because I've never gotten a hateful comment without like at least 10 fans right behind them like, get out of here, we're the sheriff. So like I am appreciative to my community to like keep me at least invigorated in this work and to really, really self-police. They report a lot. You know, as soon as like someone once told me that they were like, oh, we don't like your short sleeve shirt because you have fat arms. And there were like 15 people down, like, get out of here, you idiot. Like, we love her arms, we love her legs. And I was like, you know, so like I have to trust that like those things make it better than the people who want me to stop.
I, like, in terms of tone, I think a lot of, we kind of are in this era of, like, allergy to sincerity and conviction. And I think that's why, because I think of, like, Natalie's, did this video about Jordan Peterson last year that starts with a very, just beleaguered, exhausted, I don't care about this at all. But we have to talk about it, you know, so it's like, starting with that tone, again, is like a disarming thing, and that's part of why, like, we definitely, will always kind of start with the sort of, like, presentation of indifference, because a lot of people, especially younger people, especially younger men, see having convictions as being, like, the equivalent of just, like, a screaming, like, social justice warrior woman with like colored hair at a picket, like screaming in some guy's face who's just smugly like facts over field baby. And like it's kind of, that's one of the things you have to navigate, but tone is a great way to do that. Like, and it is kind of sad that you kind of have to present yourself like you care less than you do, but it does make people like, if you're trying to introduce people to like new ideas or trying to get them to think about something in a different way, then kind of starting with this tone of like either humor or indifference or like annoyance or just basically detachment from sincere emotions, and then kind of building to that, like, because whenever we do a topic that is even a little bit baby teensy political, like, you know, we're talking about like race or gender or like some sort of history inequality or some labor issue, like I will always bury the lead and like put that at the back of the video and like build to that, and we will try to like build our argument in a way that like uses like humor to disarm, but also like by the time we actually get to the point the argument has been sufficiently built that hopefully, you know, the type of person that may normally be put off by that sort of thing will actually be a little more open to it.
I think for me it's trusting the audience and being open and honest and saying, first of all, it's okay that if you have a different opinion, did you watch or listen to the whole video though? Like, do not talk to me if you have not actually consumed the entire piece of content. And in that way, I'm like, yeah, send me paragraphs, send me, you know, thesis statements, and it all, as long as we are starting from the same point, which is, have you consumed this piece of content? I trust that you will do that, and you should trust that I'm going to accept your differing opinion because it's okay.
I think sometimes it's also, sorry, I'm a little hoarse. It's been a long VidCon. But I think sometimes it's also about like rewarding the behavior you like as well. So like, as you were saying, if you haven't watched the whole video, I'm not gonna respond. If you haven't, like if you show something that says, I didn't even watch the video, but I know you're wrong, then it's like, okay, keep it moving. Leave the comment there and just keep moving on. Like I try not to chase bad actors, because I think sometimes there's a satisfaction of feeling like you got one up on someone who was trying to tear you down, but really you're just like chasing them down the drain with like that kind of behavior. And I think having just recently like finished grad school, this is something I also saw in grad school, and I see it online in comment section, which is like, we think of intelligence as this hammer that we have to use to bludgeon our enemies to death. And like, that's the only way we could be smart. Like, being smart means like, I have an opinion, it's wrong and strong, doesn't matter, I'm gonna use this hammer and just not gonna stop until you're dead. And it's not about compromise or building any kind of knowledge production or actually doing productive work. It's about like grandstanding. And sometimes I'm trying to model for my commenters like, hey, actually intelligence can be a hammer, but it's a tool that does other things besides beat people to death. Like, you could build something with it, so you could differ from me and have a different opinion from me, and I'll be receptive to that. And there are some things that it's not a matter of opinion, so I don't debate certain topics. I'm like, we're starting from a groundwork of everyone is a human being, so I'm not gonna chase you down that avenue either. But if it's about analysis or research, like, we could differ, and you could use like that intelligent hammer to build something, and we'll build something together. But we don't have to both be dead by the end of this, or both feel like we got put out by the end of this to make it a productive conversation. And I think that that's really challenging, because it's like we learn it in the classroom and then we just take it online, and we don't know other ways to perform authority or intelligence that aren't like destructive or really challenging. And I would say, excuse me, even if you are from like underrepresented or marginalized communities, sometimes you adopt those methods too because you're so tired of getting beat up on. And like, there are times when I lose my cool. I mean, I caught myself the other day writing like, I mean, practically a Bible to this crazy comment on my video, and then I had to delete it. I was like 30 minutes later when I was like, oh, okay, I ran out of characters on a YouTube comment, like maybe I should stop. I should stop, reel it in. Like, and I had to delete it specifically because I was like, you can't do this. Like, this is not the behavior you want to model. And if you start doing it, then that's what this space is. So like, you're at the top of the pyramid, and the person at the top of the pyramid of the channel, the creator, models what the community is.
Yeah. Have there been like other ways that you've engaged with criticism of your work, or have you found it to be productive in some ways, or is it a situation where you like avoid the comments? I mean, I know that you thought a lot about this.
Yeah, I have a system, but that's like for YouTube. For like on Patreon, I kind of have like a deal with like, you know, behind the paywall is sort of like I encourage criticism, like especially if there's something I can fix. Like if I got something wrong, please tell me. If there's something color grade, or like if I made some sort of error, or like one time I pronounced Tanasi Coates' name wrong, and like someone like and like I fixed it, you know. So like that I find helpful, and good faith criticism, like you know, it's there, but it tends not to be on YouTube, which I feel like YouTube comments come in like two flavors. It's like the, you know, effusive praise and the, you know, the not that. And very rarely do you see like something good faith that's not just some pedantic jerk who's trying to flex on his like minutia of knowledge. And a lot of times, like I get corrected on things that I'm not wrong about. Like if we corrected, like they will wrongly correct me. Like I think the one I get most of all is like the age of Aragorn in The Hobbit. Like, and it's just like, you're wrong. Like, this is a math question, one with a concrete answer, and stop correcting me, I'm not wrong. But, yeah, and I think it's hard to actually parse those out and actually kind of build up the mental fortitude to, you know, deal with bad faith actors while being receptive to good faith criticism. Because, you know, it's like good faith criticism is like, you know, high quality. It's kind of hard to find. But like I figured the way I have gone about it is mostly through Patreon.
It is, it's definitely difficult to maintain, like, because on YouTube, like as Lindsay said, most of the criticism you get is basically not worth listening to. But you also don't want to completely nail your mind shut and get to a point where you're just like not listening to anyone who criticizes you. So, you know, one thing I will do is I don't respond to like a criticism like as it's happening generally. I try to like wait a bit, cool down, find the most like the people who are like saying it in the nicest way, and then think about it there, where like my mind's gonna be more open to it than when someone's just being, I think, like really unreasonable in terms of criticizing me. Like, you know, there's sort of different ways of criticizing people. There's like saying, oh, like what you said is wrong, or what you did is wrong, and then they're saying like you are clearly a very bad person because of what you said. And if someone's doing that, then it's hard to listen to. But if someone's doing the harsh thing, then you can kind of listen to it. So I find that I mean, it's actually kind of work to seek out criticism that's worth listening to, and you know, it's not the most fun part of this, but it's worth doing if you want to stay honest.
It there's a certain thrill now with dethroning your heroes, and that, you know, because whenever, you know, like you said, like maybe you'll have a certain sect that is giving a criticism that has a good point, but they're doing it in a way that is just cruel, and like that's the only way to describe it. And so it's like maybe they are sort of like morally in the right in a conceptual academic way, but they're not in the way that they go about it, but they do it because it feels good. It feels good to like take people down, especially if they're more popular than you. The increase in that tendency has made it harder to actually ferret out like good faith criticism, because it is really hard to find people that, you know, like there's a bunch of people that are just like saying something that might have a point, but they're doing it in this way that's like, you're a bad person, you are canceled forever. Then it's just like, well, then I guess I'll go home. Like, if I'm bad, there's no reason for me to change or re-examine my behavior.
I think that, yeah, exactly. I'd say ditto to everything you guys have said, but I have like two instances of types of criticism. So my channel, because we're a history channel, like a generally like very broad history channel, although tends more towards US history, which is my own specialty, but there have been times when fans have found errors in academic articles and sources that I've used, and I find that so delightful. So like they'll write and they'll be like, that date is wrong, and I was like, I chased this down for like, you know, peer-reviewed articles, but it is wrong, and you are correct, and I'll make the addition to that, because to me, one of the delights of like having a big like audience to talk to is like decentralizing who's always in charge, and it's like we don't have to always rely on this, like we have each other as well to do some fact checking. So there's been 2 times when I've had videos that like that has happened in a source that I used, and then I was able to revise it and fix it. But then, because we're talking about identity, you know, sometimes I do videos from identities that I don't belong to, or like communities that I don't belong to, and that's always like a challenge, and it's very tricky. And there was once we did a video on why do we think clowns are scary? And so obviously I don't belong to the professional clowning community, despite what you may have heard. Well, we posted the video, and for whatever reason, it got reshared by a lot of clowning like social media groups. And so they were writing to me to like defend the honor of their craft, because they were like, this has haunted us for years, like we aren't scary. Like, yeah, no, because they were like, this is propaganda that the US government is trying to get But so I thought it was crazy, and I called my sister and I was like, so I'm getting a lot of hate mail from clowns. Exactly know what to do. And she said something that was kind of funny but really accurate. She's like, well, how often does the clowning community get covered by a major media outlet? Like, you're probably the only video that's gone up in like 2 months about clowns. And they're latching on because this is their thing. Like, as a performer myself, it's like, I mean, it sounds funny, but it's like, that's part of their identity. Like, they train, a lot of them go to like different camps, they're like doing all these I mean, I went to a lot of their Facebook pages after they started messaging me because I was curious. You know, like they're doing like Cirque du Soleil, like these are professional performers, and they're thinking about like their identity in this interesting way, and they only get talked about when like it becomes a movie again. So it was kind of an interesting learning process to me to think about like what does it mean to enter into a space that you don't belong to, and also to take seriously people's concerns about their own identity. Like obviously it was super, super funny, as opposed to like, you know, offending someone about about their own gender, about their sexuality or race. Like it felt a little lighter, but it also was equally serious to all these people who wrote to me. And you know, I spent a lot of time apologizing. I was like, I'm not saying the clowns are scary. I'm saying, why is there a cultural phenomena about haunted clowns? I think you guys are great. Like I love clowning. I love the circus. And then I felt like I was kind of, you know, pandering at that point maybe. But you know, I think sometimes because we're on this side of it, and you know, we get so much criticism, it's hard to not just feel like you're inundated with people's voices, but there are times when people do have like legitimate concerns and things that they want to raise with you. And as long as they're not telling you like, you're a bad person, like you're this horrible monster witch who doesn't want me to be happy, it's okay to take that seriously, or like to use, again, humor. Humor was a lot of the responses I sent to those clowns, was just, you know, I'm also a funny person, like, I'm wearing a teal sweatshirt and like a blue weave in this episode, like, I'm also, you know, with you, like, we could do something together. And I love, like, being able to at least engage people on that level and try. But then there are other times where, like, if I'm clearly not in a certain identity group, then I try to just highlight and pin those comments and see if I can be better next time.
For me, I have to understand and remind myself really that putting my face on in a video is the way I'm communicating, and I have to honor the fact that the only way they can communicate back is through a comment. And so I think it's easy for people to say, well, if you have an opinion, make a YouTube channel. It's like, no, this is the forum in which they are empowered to talk back. And so just reminding myself that they are, you're allowed to do that. I'm a YouTube watcher, I'm a YouTube commenter, and every time a commenter is saying, well, I'm like, oh, I want to say a little something. And so I just remember that. And when it comes to critique, especially in the work that I do, which is very experience-based, I have to be gentle with people and remember that people are oftentimes coming from a place of hurt, and that I am the person who has opened myself up for them to communicate their hurt to me. And so I have to just remember that, okay, we can start a dialogue. What I'm not saying is necessarily truth, capital T, but it's my lived experience. And so maybe your comment is based on your lived experience. And so instead of responding to someone's comment with a statement, I respond to someone's comment with a question. And then from there, we can continue to have a conversation.
Yeah, one of the things I find most helpful in kind of processing on my own the really vitriolic criticism I get, because a lot of the most strident, controversial trash takes come from trans people. And that's something that's been really hard for me to kind of wrap my head around and to respond to in a way. But one thing that I have to sort of remind myself is that I get to do this. I get to have my face out there, and I get to make art, and I get to say it my way. And for a lot of people, raging on Twitter, that's it. That's the only outlet they have for this anger. And so it does help to understand that when people are doing this, it comes from this place of just being backed into a corner, basically.
I have one more question, and then we'll go to the hashtag identity Vidcon19. So I'll remind folks to submit any questions there. But one part of all y'all's approaches to video is that you're very thought out and researched, and there are a lot of facts presented, and I think that's a great way to convey information in a really informed way. So tell us about your research process and how you make sure you're talking about things in an educated way, and what that process is for you.
So Say It Loud is a show about Black histories and Black cultures. We focus on the United States right now, even though it will happen later. And so my background is comedy writing, and so I was like, I don't feel very comfortable with the academic side of Google Books, Google Research, what do I go on? I can't use regular Google to find these sort of sources, and so PBS Visual Studios provided a historian, and she's a Black woman, and she kind of provides the academic side of things and provides us with context, which is always super important when we're writing our scripts. So the sketches come from kind of the way I see the world, and they're opinion-based, but when it comes to the meat of the episode and the meat of the content, it's very factual, and that's because we have a historian that's always giving us the information. We have calls with her. Sometimes she appears in the episodes when we're super you got it, girl, you have to explain this. And so we also interview people on the show, and so that kind of journalistic approach helps us to kind of throw in the humor in our personal experiences, but also be factual. So the research happens as a team.
I'd say for our show, we go the opposite way. So my background and training is as a traditional academic. My background is in African American Studies and American Studies, so I have an interdisciplinary degree. I'm a historian, and I also think about cultural criticism and kind of a wide range of social sciences. But that's why my team, the folks who helped me actually make it something that people could even stand to listen to for 5 minutes, is so important to me, because I remember the first script I ever wrote for the show had footnotes, and then one of our editors was like, that's dumb. No one can read a footnote when you're in a video. So you should fix that because anything that's not in the body of the script doesn't exist. And it was just like such a learning curve for me to figure out like how to invite people in and to like also like let down some of that mantle of authority that academics are told that we have to don. Like the idea of being funny or like having humor or having like openness or sincerity, as Lindsay was saying, is like really challenging. So really like it starts from the research for me, and a lot of like why I try to trend towards a lot of traditional academic resources is because the books are too expensive for a lot of people to purchase, or the articles are behind huge paywalls that academic universities control. So I'm trying to just translate the work that people in my field do for people who also need that work and don't have access to it. And then, you know, usually the scripts, I mean, if anyone is here from Team Origin, I can't see them, but usually the scripts are completely over word count. I mean, I'm supposed to be at 2,100 words and it'll be like 5,000. So we do like a really hard like trimming of the fat. Like how do we get down to the essential thing? How do we cut like any jargon that like is a barrier for people? You know, we don't need to use like insider words. We don't need to use any kind of vocab that someone can't just like comprehend easily, because the point is that this is everyone's knowledge. It belongs to all of us. So it starts from like my training and then becoming undisciplined through the process of like having other sounding boards tell me, girl, this isn't gonna play. Like try again. Like this is 3 paragraphs, make it 4 sentences, please. Please save us from this. So I think that like I always value my team a lot for that reason, because I don't know, it wasn't my ambition to put stuff on YouTube. And like the partnership with PBS was very unexpected to me, and so I needed a lot of guidance to just figure out like how to open myself up to making something that was not a traditional paper. And then also like footnotes, they do crazy things to the prompter, like they don't have like good loading and formatting. So there was a point where I think that now I feel more confident and comfortable, and like, you know, every once in a while I'll do a script that's 2,400 words, so I'm not quite as bad as I used to be, but you know, I still lean on the opinion of my team to help like shape the content that we create so that it's something that's like very approachable and something that doesn't feel like I'm like talking down my nose at someone.
Well, I guess I do different kinds of research. Like, I do have some academic background, but I don't do a lot of academic research for videos. Mostly if I do like reading for a video, I read a thing I disagree with, and it's just to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. So like when I did the Jordan Peterson video, I read Jordan Peterson's shitty books, and I thought you might like it, so I don't agree with you, but like it's, you know, I also do like, it's like internet field research, basically, like where I'm, like on the video I did on incels, like, yeah, I read all the articles that people had written about incels, but that just wasn't very useful, as it turned out, compared to just going to their forums and just reading it for hours and hours and then taking a long shower. Like, that's where the truth was lying, I found.
Yeah, ours varies a lot, because some episodes are way more research heavy than others. Like, I guess, honestly, like, the work we do for PBS is far and away the most labor intensive, and from a research standpoint, because it's like, that's where most of the time ends up getting spent is on like research, because it's like, since it's a show about books just take longer to read, as opposed to doing one video about one movie, which are, you know, far and away the easiest to do. But even then, you know, part of the challenge is to present it in a way that people may not have thought of, or may not have seen. So, for instance, when we did an episode about Bright, which was this terrible Netflix movie starring Will Smith and an orc, you know, orc cop, and it would have been so easy to just like rip into this for 40 minutes, but I thought it was a lot more interesting to put it in a context of like the history of the fantasy genre and like where it pulls inspiration from and why it ended up being the way it is. So I think like it's one thing to like share an opinion, but like what's more interesting for us is like trying to figure out why it is the way it is. What's, you know, sociological phenomena led to this particular trend in media? Why were there so many like nuclear mutants in the 1950s? And like why were there so many like weird, you know, misogynist, anti-feminist like post-apocalypses in the 1970s where, you know, men are effete and women have taken over the world. So I think that's just a lot more interesting, and that side of research is where most of it ends up. But like, you know, my co-writer Angelina tends to do more of the research than I do. But and it can also be like field, like rarely. Sometimes we'll do documentary type stuff. Like we did fly to New Zealand to do a bunch of interviews for our episodes on The Hobbit, and that was interesting. Wow, we learned a lot. But that, on the other hand, like that's while it's interesting and it's difficult, it's rewarding, but it's like because it's YouTube, it's really time intensive, it's really exhausting, so you can't do that sort of thing very often. So mostly we'll just rely on like JSTOR for like historical stuff or academic stuff, or just like news articles if we're just trying to like place a date and a time, or what director said what and when, and you know who said what dumb thing about Game of Thrones. So yeah, we cast a very wide net research-wise.
We have to wrap up soon, but I do want to take a question from Twitter. Viola James asks, do you ever find that your use of humor in an effort to diffuse a situation is received poorly? And how do you handle and convey that humor is intended to minimize the conflict?
I dodged a bullet. I'll tell you about a bullet dodge. Like I did an episode about the monster boyfriends, like the phenomenon, like The Shape of Water and like Beauty and the Beast and stuff like that. And one of the things I touched on was an anime called The Ancient Mage's Bride. I originally had a joke in there about Japanese consent laws, not knowing that the U.S.'s federal consent laws were way worse. A. B. It was incredibly tasteless. C. It was factually wrong on both levels. So, fortunately, a Patreon person like caught it and like DM'd me and was like, "This, you're gonna get murdered for this." So I cut it out and it was fine. But like that was like me trying to make a joke to like kind of diffuse a sensitive topic, and like thank God I got caught. But like that would have been like a whoopsie doodle. That I would have gotten canceled.
So I made a video once, I forget which one, it was like the origin of the category of race, like why do we associate race with skin tone, and how has that played out differently over time? And someone wrote a comment that was like, essentially, even though she's always smiling, you could tell this woman is filled with rage. Like she's just using this as a mask to hide like how much anger she has deep in her heart and like disdain for straight men. And I was like, wow, you are pretty rage-filled. So I guess it's safe to assume that everyone in the world sees through that lens, but that's logical. But I will say that that's the one I get the critique for most, is like my affect. Like, and I think that sometimes people forget how challenging it is to put something online that you're like, this could be viewed by 5 people or 5 million. And so, it's necessary for me to feel like very inhabited in my body and comfortable and confident on camera. So like, yeah, I'm smiling. Yeah, I use my hands a lot, which is another one that people ask about, but you know, whatever, I don't care. And it's just not about you. I think that sometimes people assume that the things that you do to make this work are about the viewers, but like that one, like the fact that I, regardless of content, sometimes have to smile just to be able to make it to the end of the episode, I'm not smiling for anyone else besides myself. So I think that like that is one that sometimes gets misread, like how you present, or it's like, oh, your clothes are too bright and playful. Like, should I show up in funeral clothes for every sad episode we have to make? No, I think that is the one that is the most challenging in terms of humor. It's like your tone isn't quite right, but my tone is for me. It's for me to be able to do this thing on and on and on and on again. So I guess that's the one that gets like misread the most on my channel.
Yeah, I get that too. I've noticed that like if once a video kind of ekes out of like the core subscriber base, then I start getting a lot of like, don't like woman do bad word bad, and I don't, nah. And you know, and then it, you know, it's like the bigger a video gets, the worse it gets. Like in terms of audience, it's like sometimes you'll get the dudes that just don't like the way they don't like the cut of your jib, you know, but then it'll get worse. Like this last one we did about well, anyway, there were some bad people in the comments, and a lot of it had to do with affect.
For me, it's really dependent on the platform. Like YouTube, I find I can really push it pretty far with the consume a YouTube video all at once, and so they see the context, and they see that like this joke as part of a bigger story that you're telling, or the joke as part of an argument that you're making. Whereas on Twitter, it doesn't work that way, because what people will do is they'll screenshot one tweet out of a thread, and then use this to see, look what ContraPoints said. Looks like someone's getting canceled this week. Yeah. Whereas, so don't joke on Twitter. In fact, don't use it at all.